All right, everyone. Thanks for being here. I think we'll go ahead and get started just a minute or so past the hour. On behalf of the Jesuit Schools Network's conference office, welcome to our latest virtual Ignatian inquiry session. As you know, the JSN seeks to be a supportive resource to our member schools, and this virtual session is designed to be just that. A carved out space to listen, to learn, and to engage with one another. We are eager to encourage a spirit of inquiry across the many layers of our work in Jesuit education, and we envision our particular brand of Ignatian inquiry to be the art of inquiry as seen through our Ignatian lens, asking questions and exploring issues that matter in our schools through the frame of our shared Jesuit mission. For those of you that I do not know, I am Kristen Ross Cully, and I serve as Director of Educational Inquiry with the JSN. I'd like to thank my colleague, Kristen Smith, also here on the call, who leads all things communications for us at the JSN, and she will be here with us to hopefully enjoy a smooth Zoom session together. Before we get started, if we might begin as we do by taking a moment for an opening prayer, a moment of quiet during the day. So if we can quiet ourselves and be reminded that in being together this afternoon, that we are in the presence of God, in the name of the Father and Son and Holy Spirit. And I've chosen for today a prayer to the Creator from Fratelli Tutti. Lord, Father of our human family, you created all human beings equal in dignity. Pour forth into our hearts a fraternal spirit and inspire in us a dream of renewed encounter, dialogue, justice, and peace. Move us to create healthier societies and a more dignified world, a world without hunger, poverty, violence, and war. May our hearts be open to all the peoples and nations of the earth. May we recognize the goodness and beauty that you have sown in each of us, and thus forge bonds of unity, common projects, and shared dreams. St. Ignatius, pray for us. Amen. In the name of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Again, I welcome you this afternoon to our latest inquiry session entitled Ignite Inclusion, Widening the Circle of LGBTQ plus students in Jesuit schools. This virtual session will explore the doctoral research undertaken by Dr. Karen Napolitano. In sharing her research across the JSN, Dr. Napolitano will explore how her doctoral program challenged her to identify an underserved population in our Jesuit schools, focusing her literature review on mental and behavioral health risks for LGBTQ plus identifying students in non-affirming school cultures. With a focus on improving outcomes, she created an independent learning module titled Ignite Inclusion. The purpose of this learning module is to challenge adult support personnel like counselors, social workers, campus ministers, etc., in Jesuit schools on their roles as allies to accompany young people. It's my pleasure to formally introduce Dr. Napolitano. She has been a Jesuit educator since 2007 and currently serves as the Director of Counseling Services at Georgetown Preparatory School. She holds a master's degree in counseling from Johns Hopkins University and a doctorate in social work from the University of Southern California. Dr. Napolitano carries Maryland State certification in counseling with a focus in group counseling and special education services, addressing the first grand challenge for social work to ensure healthy development for all youth. Her doctoral capstone project explored the experiences of students and alumni from Jesuit secondary schools who identify as LGBTQ and initiatives to advance their connection and belonging. Dr. Napolitano is a member of the inaugural cohort of the Association of Independent Schools of Greater Washington Women's Leadership Initiative and has worked in social services for vulnerable populations and community-based mental health for a decade prior to joining Georgetown Prep. It's my pleasure to turn it over to you, Dr. Napolitano.
That all sounds very grand, Kristen. I really appreciate that. Thank you. And I'm very honored and grateful for the participation of everyone who is in this call. I recognize how precious time is, especially in this week before Thanksgiving. So thank you. Thank you for being here. And my takeaway from your opening prayer is this is meaningful work to move towards a more dignified world, right? This is where we want to be. This is how we want to serve our students, and this is where we want to recognize and interrupt the pain points. So let me see if I can get my slides up. Just give me a second here. Okay, so the title of my capstone project was Ignite Inclusion, and my purpose was to really widen that circle of belonging and inclusion for our students who identify as LGBTQ plus in Jesuit schools. And I'd like to just share a little background with you here. For my social workers, if there's any social workers in the call, you know that a lot of the work we do is microservices delivery, right? One-to-one direct support for mental and behavioral health challenges. But at the doctoral level, the goal of social work is to identify and address and interrupt big social problems, right? Identify an area for growth and change, and to reduce risk for a vulnerable population. So the work I chose is aligns with the first grand challenge for social work. And Kristen mentioned this in her introduction. About 10 years ago, social work embarked on an enterprise to identify all of the challenges across the American landscape where people are vulnerable across the lifespan, from birth to natural death. And they place those grand challenges into three big buckets. The first one is individual and family well-being. The second big bucket is to build a stronger social fabric. And the third bucket is to advance a just society. So altogether, there are 14 grand challenges. To ensure healthy development for all youth is the first grand challenge. So acknowledging that how well young people survive and grow in our culture is essential to the success of our country and the well-being of the people here. I just want to say a word about how I was called into this work and why. So just a little background of my positionality with this work. I would describe myself as an accidental ally, and I'm extraordinarily humbled to be a part of this. I do not identify as part of the LGBTQ plus community, but I have been grateful and honored to accompany young people in their journey who do identify as part of the LGBTQ plus community. My work really began as the accidental ally in 2015 when we had a group of seniors who said, you know, we're here at Georgetown Prep, but we're invisible, and we want to be recognized both as individuals who might be separate and yet together with the community, and also that we can build some affinity for ourselves and build a sense of community by forming a club or a support group. So it was that group of seniors in that class of 2015 who first approached me about the possibility of moderating a club for them. And I agreed, and they put together a beautiful, passionate mission statement, an explanation for their work, an understanding of how they can connect to Jesuit mission and pedagogy. And I keep their mission statement in my lap drawer of my desk to this day as a reminder of how inspirational their initial work was. I'm also the mother to 3 children, 1 daughter and 2 sons, and I am the parent to a young person who identifies as LGBTQ plus. My youngest child identifies as gay, experiences same-sex attraction, and also exists in a sort of gender non-conforming space. Both of my sons graduated from Georgetown Prep, so I also have the insight on the parent side to see what education. So that's sort of where I am in terms of this work and how I felt called to it. As Krista mentioned, I have been 10 years in my role directing counseling services at Georgetown Prep. So you'll hear me use this term LGBTQ plus. It's a very broad term. You know, everyone in our conversation today recognizes that no one alphabet soup of letters can really capture the full range of individual human experiences and identities. But just, you know, for the purposes of this conversation, I will use that term. So as I considered what approach I could take to support our young people, and to kind of capture the challenges of what it means to ensure a healthy development for all youth, I started to think about our students here at Georgetown Prep, those seniors from the class of 2015, and what their experience was like if they weren't always able to feel seen or visible or understood. So the work challenged me to do a number of exhaustive lit reviews, and you know, there's miles, literally miles of data that talk about how LGBTQ students in non-affirming or non-supportive school cultures enhances and increases their vulnerability for risk for negative mental and behavioral health outcomes. So I'll just share with you a little bit of that data. On the national level, there's several organizations that are collecting information about those risks. The Trevor Project does great work every other year. They conduct a national survey on LGBTQ plus youth mental health. The Human Rights Campaign also does a data collection on young people ages 13 through 18 and what their experience is like, and that's usually happens every 3 to 5 years. And the CDC every other year also collects data through their youth risk behavior surveillance system. So these are large models of data collection to look at the experiences of LGBTQ plus youth in school cultures and what impact that might have. And so thinking about those three possible sources of data, I decided to pull from the Human Rights Campaign. When I actually wrote my capstone defense, that was the most current data, so that's what I'm going to share with you today. And again, this data is specific to young people ages 13 through 18. So I just want you to take a few minutes to absorb this. Of the 13,000 young people who participated in the survey, and this was a national survey across all 50 states, 46% reported feeling unsafe at school. 6 out of 10 reported experiences of teasing, verbal bullying, and in some cases, physical bullying by peers at school. Most kids keep that experience of suffering or bullying to themselves. Only 1 in 5 reported that they would tell adults about the experience. 55% screen positive for depression and 64% screen positive for anxiety. So those are alarming statistics, right? And those are numbers that are outside of what kids who identify in the mainstream of sexual identity report. And that's important to remember. So as I sort of absorbed this data across lit reviews and analyzing the data from the CDC, analyzing the data from the Trevor Project and the Human Rights Campaign, I had to think for myself, what does this mean for us as Jesuit schools, right? What experience are our students who identify as LGBTQ plus experiencing in Jesuit secondary schools? So the challenge of my capstone was to determine if these national trends are reflected in our network, in our Jesuit schools network. And then also to listen to the voices of what LGBTQ plus students and alumni have to say about their lived experience of going through secondary schools. I also wanted to consider what is protective for our students in our Jesuit mission, right? Like a lot of the work we do is designed to really see and advance dignity. But the goal is to figure out if we're meeting that mission, and then in what ways can we enhance and grow support. So that's sort of the framework for how I started to think about collecting information for my capstone. And I should say too, everything I did related to my capstone was just on the secondary level. You know, I recognize that there are Jesuit schools, middle schools, and elementary schools, but everything I'm going to discuss today is just related to high schools, secondary schools for young people ages 13 through 18. So the first thing I did was to ask people in our network, schools in our network, what their experience was, right? So I did a data collection in May of 2023. Kristen helped me to get this out to our network. It was this very simple, some of you in this call may have participated in it, a very simple 10-question mixed method survey trying to capture quantitative and qualitative data on school culture and services provided to our students who identify as LGBTQ+. We had 26 responses that represented 18 schools across the Jesuit Schools network, which is about a 30% response rate. And I pulled 3 questions out of that survey to kind of focus on in this talk. The first question was, and I should say too that the survey went out to school counselors, campus ministers, nurses, school-based social workers, anybody who served in a school support role, right? So it didn't directly go to teachers, it didn't directly go to school leadership, but rather folks who were on the support side of working with students in our high schools. So to this question, 12 schools who responded said yes, they did know of students, and in most cases, more than one student who was at risk for self-harm or suicide, and who also identified as LGBTQ+. And that was, you know, considering our response rate, that was a pretty high response. I also asked the question, do you know of any students identifying as LGBTQ+ who engaged in school avoidance or absenteeism because of negative emotions or fear from bullying? School avoidance can be something as simple as avoiding lunch, right? So if you don't feel connected to a social group, it could be hanging out in the bathroom or finding another space like the library to avoid be missing or skipping a single class or missing an entire day of school because of discomfort or negative emotions. And we had 11 schools responded yes, they did know of students, LGBTQ+ students who missed school because of fear or bullying. And then the third question I pulled from my survey was, does your counseling and/or student support team receive training on gender or sexuality awareness specific to adolescent development? And the response rate was smaller here. Only 8 schools of the 18 who replied said that yes, school support personnel had received specific training, which I think was also illustrative. So I did a second collection of information surveying all of the schools, all the secondary schools in our network to see which of our schools actually host active GSAs, sometimes formerly called gay straight alliances, in a more contemporary context called gender and sexuality awareness groups. And in March of 2023, only 27 total out of all of the Jesuit secondary schools have or host active gender and sexuality awareness groups. So that is, you know, that's below the 50% mark for our network. So in thinking about that, you know, that's like one data collection from school support personnel, you know, a glimpse at what the national data tells us. And because I think storytelling is powerful, because the voices of people who have a lived experience are so much more potent than anything that data can tell us, I decided to go ahead and see if I could have conversations with alumni in our network. So I was able to interview 20 students across 5 schools in our network who were alumni of Jesuit secondary schools. And I depended on sort of snowball sampling for those of you who are researchers. You know, it was like talk to one kid at Georgetown Prep, who talked to a couple kids at Gonzaga, who talked to a couple kids at Xavier High School, who talked to a couple kids at Fordham Prep, who talked to a couple kids at BC High. So that's how I was able to draw in some alumni voices. And those voices, those stories were very powerful. Every student I talked to, every alumnus I talked to, was able to identify an adult on campus with whom they had a very positive and powerful relationship. An adult with whom they felt safe, an adult with whom they felt visible, an adult who felt like an ally and a person they could turn to, you know, for in a moment of crisis or in a moment of need. So I think in that manner, like that sort of protective element of adults who are prepared to be present to young people who needed support, that seems to exist, you know, based on my interviews of alumni. That said, every young person I talked to also described difficult moments and pain points. And of those voices, I've pulled 3 different stories here, and I'm just going to share some of their words with you. And again, these are verbatim quotes from our alumni community. I picked this one because, and I'll just invite you to read these on your own. I picked this one because the word castrated really stayed with me. This young person felt that no matter how he identified, he wasn't allowed, because of the cultural experience of school, to really be his authentic self, right? And in order to participate socially, you know, go to dances, go to proms, whatever, he had to remain hidden, and the word he used to describe that hidden feeling was castrated. And that word really stayed with me, which is why I chose to pull his voice into this presentation today. The second voice, and I invite you to read this on your own. The word that stayed with me was hopscotched, right? Hopscotch from safe zone to safe zone. So this young person talked about having to figure out where those places were where he could feel truly safe, right? The teachers he could connect with, the peers he knew he could be with whom he could be his authentic self. The places where classrooms where they were having conversations that resonated with his understanding of the world. So that word hopscotch stayed with me. And the third voice is from a young person assigned male at birth who identified as female by the time they reached the end of their graduation experience. And that young person described like particular pain points, right? And in what is, you know, effectively an all boys and all male learning environment, this young person experienced intense gender dysphoria, was able to feel supported because the school could make accommodations for dress code, relaxed some things like how short hair had to be and so on. But it was a challenge for this young person, particularly in senior year. And that experience of being having a trans identity in a Jesuit school popped up a couple of times in my conversation with alumni, and also having an experience of being gender non-conforming also popped up in my experiences, my conversations with Jesuit alumni. And those were some particular challenging points and some particular challenging conversations. So these stories, these experiences, these data points matter to us for, you know, a lot of reasons. For one thing, we want to make sure we're advancing our Jesuit mission of Cura Personalis, but we serve a large number of students, right? And we want to make sure that those students are having more even experiences across their learning and supportive growth model. We also have to recognize that, on a national landscape, between 6 and 20% of young people identify as LGBTQ+. And that's for the age group between ages 13 and 18. So if we extrapolate that number, that national number, into our network, we can draw sort of a broad assumption that between 6 and 20% of our young people also identify as LGBTQ+. And what are we doing to make sure that they are seen and visible and we are advancing their dignity? And the Jesuit Schools Network has done a wonderful job of writing out their strategic plans, right, for, I think, going into 2025, if I'm remembering correctly. I think in Initiative 4, they specifically talk about ways to promote justice and to reduce homophobia. And I have the language of that there. I've pulled directly from our Jesuit Schools Network website. So our goal here, and part of the reason we're having this conversation, is to find ways to eradicate barriers caused by misogyny, homophobia, racism, and so on. So by confronting these challenges, by identifying these challenges, we can improve and grow towards a more authentic encounter with ourselves, each other, and of course, God. So that is the problem space, basically. That's the challenge, right? Our goal is to build towards a deeper belonging and manifestation of cura personalis. As individual schools, even here at Georgetown Prep, and through our network, right? We have to work to build visibility and support for LGBTQ+ identifying students. And as I thought about this, and this is the capstone piece, my job was to find a way to do something, right? It's fine to collect data. It's fine to be an active and humble listening, but what can we do to make effective change? So the challenge of my capstone was to create something. And I created what I call the Ignite Inclusion Learning Module. And Ignite Inclusion really draws on the concept of advancing allyship, active allyship among the adult members of Jesuit secondary schools, so that they are engaged more wholly, more concretely with improving outcomes for these young folks. So what does that look like? So Ignite Inclusion is actually like a little mini class, if you want to think of it like that. And it draws from 3 evidence-based solutions. So going back into my earlier research, there's a substantive amount of data that talk about that school counselors, social workers, nurses, and we can extrapolate to campus ministers, improve responsiveness and outcomes for LGBTQ+ students. Oftentimes, those student support personnel are the safe space for young people. And we don't control a lot of things. We don't control a lot of risk factors around things that can harm or hurt or diminish or interrupt well-being for LGBTQ+ students. But we do have agency over how well-trained our personnel are and how affirming we can grow our campuses as well, our campus cultures. So that's the first bit of evidence. The second bit of evidence looks at how positive school climate can reduce risk of suicidality. So for some students, particularly students who are coming from home cultures or home environments where they are not welcomed, affirmed, or supported, where they cannot be their authentic selves, school can become a protective factor. School can be the place where young people can be their more authentic self, or at least find some refuge from what sometimes can even be verbal or physical violence. So by creating a safe space through a positive school climate, any school can reduce risk for self-harm and suicide. And that's an important piece to remember. And then the last bit of evidence I drew on was that active student-led gender and sexuality awareness groups improve psychosocial well-being for LGBTQ plus identifying students. So if students have if students know that there's a group, if it's advertised, if it's present on the website, if it's part of a club fair, if it, serves donuts, hosts a party, if there's a visible space for kids to go where it is well integrated into the school experience and part of the and part of the large, regular, routine, everyday landscape of the school, that can improve well-being for these young folks as well. So as I started to think about crafting what my capstone learning module would look like, those are the three pieces of information I drew from. In order to truly be present, right, strong adult allyship has to exist in a couple of domains. The folks willing to be allies for young folks have to really consider places of potential bias, right? And that demands reflection. And sometimes that reflection is uncomfortable. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But the goal of true allyship, of strong action-focused allyship, begins with rooting out and identifying and working against what might be implicit or inherent biases. The second piece is identifying positive action, right? Allyship is not a feeling. I mean, it starts with a feeling, right? A desire to help, a genuine care for another human being, a student, a feeling of love for a fellow man. But true allyship is action. It's concrete steps, right? It's not, I feel good, I want to help, I really care, I love you. Those are important. But true allyship exists in a space where there's actual action taking place. And the third piece of steady and strong allyship is humility, right? In what ways do we remain a listening culture? In what ways do we remain present to the stories and needs of other human beings without superimposing our expectations and values? So I crafted Ignite Inclusion. It's a small learning module, and my goal was to create the learning module as a mechanism for change, right? Something where support personnel can consider their roles as allies through personal reflection and begin to grow in concrete ways what they can do to help and support students. And the goal, of course, is to improve mental and behavioral health outcomes, right? Lower risk of fear-based absenteeism, lower risk of self-harm, lower risk of suicidality, lower risk of even academic failure, right? Can contribute to problems with academic work. And then ultimately to enhance social connection, enhance a positive relationship with adults, and for students to experience what we want all of our students to experience, which is abundant love, a sense of belonging and connection. So in February of this year, I implemented via a prototype this little learning module. It still exists in Google Classroom. It's 5 short models that sort of follow the structure of the examen, and invites the adults to self-pace through some learning where they are considering the voices of LGBTQ plus Jesuit alumni, where they are challenging themselves to consider what their role is as allies and support for these young folks, and pushes them to really think and challenge themselves about where they can grow as allies. And in the prototype launch, I invited 20 people to participate, 20 adults. And I depended on Jack Mesereau's theory of transformational learning. I don't, if you're familiar with this. Mesereau believes that learning can happen like authentically, and people can make substantive change in their thinking and in their knowledge base at any age, right, all across the lifespan. But it always begins with putting the learner in a disorienting dilemma of what is versus what could be. So sort of depending on that concept of transformational learning, that's how I tried to structure Ignite Inclusion, right? To first put the module in an inquiry with themselves, right? You know, how well are they actually serving in the role of allyship versus how well they think they're serving in the role of allyship. So of the people who participated, I did collect data after the launch of the prototype. And these are the trends, the trend lines that I drew out from the participants as they completed the learning module. For one thing, it's reasonably short. It can be finished in about under 3 hours, maybe under 2 hours, under 3 hours. And it can be, and it's self-paced, so you can do it, start it, come back to it. There's no timeline for it. People liked that it was accessible in Google Classroom, which a lot of folks are familiar with. Self-pacing is very flexible. The student voices and alumni voices were very persuasive. Folks found that really was something that they hadn't heard. And every participant was able to identify, and that's the challenge piece at the end of the learning module, everyone was able to identify one concrete action they could take to enhance allyship and to commit to that concrete action. So you can see how it sort of follows the method of the examine. There was, in the feedback, I also got a lot of like, tell us more, right? Like, we want to know more about signs and risks. What specific steps can we take? You know, can we collaborate with other folks in member schools? So there was a real appetite for finding space to put people together to have more conversations about this and ways to grow. And I found that very, very encouraging. So sort of the key takeaways here, and I appreciate you listening to me for 30 minutes. The key takeaways are this: our Jesuit mission of Cura Personalis, our Jesuit identity, you know, the way we do things, that is already essentially protective, right? But we use that phrase a lot, Cura Personalis, and there are ways to manifest that in more robust action, you know, and I'll go back to my earlier comment. It's not just how we feel about a student or, you know, the empathy, the genuine empathy we might feel for a student's experience, but rather what can we do to create visibility? Active adult allyship moves the needle to improve campus culture. Our students, you know, pass through here in 4 years. Every kid who comes through a secondary school is in and out in 4 years. You know, often Jesuit educators are on the landscape for their entire career, sometimes, you know, decades to sometimes their entire career. So how adults model in the communities, how adults exist, how adults are present to, and how adults support initiatives of allyship, that is what improves campus culture. We know that affirming school cultures lower risks for LGBTQ plus students, and we know that there's room to grow, right? Because we've listened to some of the voices of our alumni community and some of our students as well, and some of our Jesuit Schools Network support personnel. So that's kind of the key takeaways. Just kind of from the social justice side of things, you know, the beautiful document was released last year, the Ignatian Framework for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging. What we can do here in this moment is to find ways to advance belonging, right? You know, we want kids to feel like they are truly part of the experience, not adjacent to the experience. For those of you who are familiar with the design justice principles, I was pulling away notes here. That is, the Ignite Inclusion also draws on those. The design justice principles really focus on making sure that the lived experience of those we serve is central to any initiatives that we create also focuses on honoring what's working well already within our network, and making sure that those voices we are serving are also part of the design and experience of anything that we choose to do to support a community. So I think this is sort of like a good way to wrap it up. Going forward, if there is space for us to grow, either in conversation or in a working group, one thing to look at is intersectionality among our students. For purposes of my research, I only looked at young people who identify as LGBTQ plus, but we didn't look at intersection points of things like who might identify as Black, Indigenous, or a student of color. We didn't look at socioeconomic factors. So finding ways to look at those intersection points, I think, would have value. We can do simple things like encourage all of our member schools to have active gender and sexuality awareness groups. And that's just something to count, right? How many, if we had 27 in 2023, could we have a target of having 50 or 55 by 2026 or something? We could talk about best practices and recommendations for our member schools for simple things like including enumerated anti-bullying policies. There's a fair amount of research that looks at how naming protected identities in anti-bullying policies can support and reduce the reality of verbal and physical bullying. So, lots of schools have anti-harassment policies. Up until this past year, that's all we had at Georgetown Prep, or we had an anti-harassment policy, which said, hey, we all love each other. We don't harass each other. If you feel harassed, talk to the dean of students, and, the dean of students will get involved. This year, we actually shifted that. We said, look, what we want to do is make sure that everyone here is visible, and any language that is harassing or bullying based on someone's gender, sexual identity, racial identity, socioeconomic status, these things will be addressed more firmly. So even enumerating protected identities can be a game changer for improving outcomes. One piece of information I did collect data on, but didn't fully explore in Ignite Inclusion, was finding a way to create visibility through a Jesuit learning course, even encouraging English classes, history classes to spotlight literary, historical, religious, or public figures who identify as LGBTQ+. What I heard from our alumni community was, that in this rigorous learning model, in this dense preparation for college and beyond, one of the absent pieces of information was seeing or learning about figures and literary figures, historical figures, whatever, who shared an identity with LGBTQ students. So another a point of potential visibility, growing potential visibility. And the last thing I put on this slide is sort of became my tagline during this process, which is we want to think of ourselves as a safe space for our students, and we often are. But I think the goal is to move towards a brave space where we are doing work that pushes against what might be some mainstream misunderstandings or misappropriation of identities for things that can look like culture wars or culture battles. We can be a little countercultural, right? We know that even on the national political landscape, sometimes identity of young LGBTQ plus people becomes a talking point for a political fight or a political debate. And the reality of that is that it just heightens risk. So in our Jesuit secondary schools, we can move beyond those cultural leanings, and we can become countercultural and serve as a brave space as well. And my last slide is just references, and you don't need to read that. So I am genuinely grateful for your attention to this. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. And I'm grateful. I don't even know what time it is. What time is it? Oh, we got it 10 minutes. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. We do have some time for some Q&A. If you might be in a spot where you're able to turn on your cameras, it would probably just make for a more interesting session. I'm sure Karen would appreciate that. So thank you. I'll kick us off just very quickly. Karen, I very much appreciate all of the work involved and the time and effort into today's presentation. I particularly admire the idea of a busy working educator who felt so connected to a topic like this that's obviously on the minds of so many people by the turnout that we have here today, that you dug into this, this research. So thank you for that. It strikes me that your research, of course, is very much connected to our mission as Ignatian educators, and the emphasis that you have on the power of school as a place to promote connection and belonging is really something that I'm left thinking about, and especially the power of the relationship between the adult and the child in our care. So I thank you for that. I'd ask you very quickly, I was drawn to your language of developing a listening culture. I like that, developing a listening culture. How, in your experience, do we do that? Where do you start particularly with that?
So for anybody who's a professional educator, right, our impulse is to always be the expert in the room, the sage on the stage, right? And to immediately like want to lead, want to talk, want to create space. The listening culture means that the adult in the room just has to sit down and create space for the kids to share their experiences. You know, and sometimes that means sitting a little bit in the discomfort of silence, you know, to create some space for kids to come forward and share their experiences and begin to share what is like authentically in their heart and authentically in their head for what they're experiencing. And that, you know, that's the reality of that is just like, that's just like good group, good group counseling, right? You just create some space and sort of sit in the discomfort of silence until people are willing to enable and feel allowed to start to share their stories. So I think that piece of being a listening culture, and that's kind of on the micro level. On the meso level, that means, you know, potentially having conversations at the leadership level, right? The leadership in schools, either to try to find ways to introduce the conversation as part of either school initiatives, planning, even professional development days that embed into those professional development days conversations about what the LGBTQ plus student experience might be in your school, which is something that is often not discussed.
Thank you. What other questions do you have from the group? If I might ask you just to go ahead and chime in, if you could introduce yourself and the school where you're from, I think that would be helpful. So please go ahead. We'll do our best to spotlight you.
I see something in the chat too. I'm going to try to respond to that as I can. Can I ask if there's any other social workers on the call? School-based social workers or school-based counselors? I see one hand. Okay. Some here. Okay. A couple. Okay. School counselor. Okay. So most of the conversations I had skewed to schools here on the East Coast, just because that's sort of how snowball sampling works. So I'd be curious to hear, you know, what schools in the middle of the country, if there's any voices in this call from the middle of the country, or schools on the West Coast are experiencing as well.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name's Claudia Spinafamia. I'm a teacher at Brebeuf. We're in Toronto, Canada.
Mhm.
So one thing that you said that got my interest was that not every school in the United States, or that you had pulled from, not every school has a GSA.
Mhm.
So the school board, we are publicly funded, so we are part of our Toronto Catholic District School Board. And we are mandated to have a GSA, which is wonderful. Our problem, though, is getting the students to be brave enough to come out and join us. So that's what we're dealing with. And I don't know if you've seen that or anyone else has seen that and how you are navigating that.
Thank you for that question. So, I talked a little bit about action and visibility. So sometimes the adult has to be the person to create the space, right? Here in my office, I keep a pride flag in the window. I'm on the second floor of a building. And, as you move around the quad, you can see this flag fluttering. It's right underneath one of my vents, and you can see this flag fluttering in the window. And every time we have a club fair or an activity, make sure that there's always some space for visibility, to make sure that our group here, we call it our Spectrum Alliance group. The Spectrum Alliance group is represented. So it's the flag to me just seems like a small thing. It's not a huge flag. It's just, I don't know, like 18 inches, on a little stick and blows in the window. But it's been sort of amazing to me, the number of kids who've ended up in my office who've said to me, I saw your flag, like, do you have a few minutes? So small signs of visibility can really make a difference. And that's something to remember too. Then that's what I mean when I talk a little bit about brave space as opposed to safe space, right? Not pathologizing any identity, not suggesting that any one person's way of being is anything other than beautiful, whole, complete, unique, and perfect. Is. And that's just what we want to radiate for our students. And on the sort of meso level, doing things like here at Georgetown Prep, we've shifted our culture from for proms and for homecoming, instead of being like you buy a couple's ticket, you just buy an individual ticket, which is such a small thing, such like stupid easy to do that. But it takes away the experience of like you have to have a date or whatever. So kids can show up, with a friend. They can show up by themselves. They can show up with a romantic partner. They can show up with a friend. So just selling individual tickets to dance events like that is a small way of recognizing that not everybody is having the same experience, and there's not just one way to be part of the gender and sexual identity on campus.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I'm having trouble with my camera, so I couldn't turn it on. But
No worries. I got a couple messages while I was talking that my internet was unstable, so I hope it held up. I don't know. Did I see a question, Nick?
Hi, my name's Nick. I went to and then used to teach at Regis Jesuit in Denver, and now I'm a doctoral student in theology and education at Boston College.
Hi.
I'm curious, two quick questions. One, are we on the call able to access what you created in the Google Classroom space to kind of learn from that? And then also, you shared some of the real struggles of some queer and trans students in Jesuit schools. I'm curious about anything that was positive, anything they said that maybe surprised you in its happiness and its joy.
Yeah, so the joy comes from the reality that every single kid I talked to, every single alumnus I talked to, had positive connections on campus with at least 1, 2, 3, 5 adults, right? It was more the experience of campus culture that ended up being negative, right? And there were at places where those kids didn't always feel safe and felt like they had to migrate between the safe spaces. But yes, absolutely joy. And you know, and that joy can just pop up in you know, in different ways. We've hosted convocations here where kids have been able to, you know, stand up and speak about their identities and their experience of love in the community. I think a lot of our students experience that on their Kairos retreat as well, right? So yes, absolutely, you know, queer and trans joy in those spaces as well.
I think we'll be mindful of time here, and we're just a couple minutes to the hour, so I'll take a moment just to wrap it up to say thank you to Karen for all of the time. We will make certain to share the resources if that's of interest. I know that it is in the your study as well. So thank you for all of that. Many thanks to those of you on this call for taking the time in the middle of the day to share. Again, your attendance here shows that we're really, Karen's work is extremely important to the life of our schools. We have recorded this, and we'll make sure that you get the video of this session. We hope with these inquiry sessions that they're conversation sparks that are useful to you in departments, faculties, whatever the setting may be, so that you can look for that in a couple of days. Again, thank you very much, Karen, and thanks everyone for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.